What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to this episode of DM in the PM. My name's Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth, and today I'm going to be getting absolutely schooled by Joe from Oneshotmill, a good friend of mine over on Twitter Sphere. Joe, what's going on, brother? Welcome to the show.
Not much. Not much is going on. How's about you?
Uh, just getting ready to talk some D&D, talk some one-shots, and I can already feel that I'm not touching the bottom anymore. I'm well out of my depth. That as we move into the one-shot sphere, my players will attest that I am not the guy you come to if you want advice on one-shots. That's precisely the reason I reached out, and I'm really glad we can have this conversation.
No, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool, man. Cool. Well, I think we can kind of dive right in. I mean, for everyone at home, we really just kind of collided in the Twitter sphere. I don't remember how far back, but we had some cool exchanges, and you and I got to chatting a little bit about one shots, and it really got me thinking. You know, it's something I've harped on the channel a number of times. Is if you find yourself as a DM, I'm sure the same goes for a player as well, but you find yourself in a space where you can tell you're not comfortable with the skill set you currently have. That's not an excuse to just avoid that aspect of running the game, avoid that aspect um, of tabletop RPGs as a whole. So this, to some extent, is my effort to put my money where my mouth is. So hopefully, I'm going to walk away from this one feeling like I'm a little stronger and a little more ready to tackle the next one shot attempt that I have. And in that spirit, can you just kind of kick me off with a little bit of, I guess, for starters, give me a sense when you're thinking about one shots of, what's going through your mind with regard to best practices, any of the thoughts as someone who really has focused on, can I say exclusively the one shot space? Is that fair to say?
In terms of creation, 100%. I mean, I'm running a campaign for some people now.
Okay.
Fandelver campaign that's I think past
Okay.
two
Very cool.
years at this point.
Oh, very nice.
So
Very nice.
I'm very aware of the other end of the spectrum
Okay.
of the
Cool.
never-ending story. But in
Yeah.
terms of creation, I at this point 100% devoted to things that can at least be played as a one shot, something that if that's what you want to accomplish, getting it down in one sitting, that's what I'm trying to make for
Gotcha.
sure.
And before we dive into the nuts and bolts, which I really am excited myself to get into, why one shots? Like what's the draw for you? And I guess if you were giving your elevator pitch to all the other DMs who might be watching, why should they think about one shots as maybe something they should be experimenting with more or running at their own tables?
Well, I think there's kind of two answers to that question, or maybe there were two questions. One, why one shots for me, and kind of my elevator pitch to DMs. The first half, why one shots for me, um, the answer is my mom peed on a imaginary sheep, and to give you a little bit of context for
Yeah, I think
that,
you're gonna need to flesh that one out for us a little bit.
um, I was running a one shot for my mother, my sister, and my oldest, who at the time was probably 8 or 9. And
Okay.
it's called A Wild Sheep Chase. It's by Winghorn Press. And it's designed for fourth to fifth level, I think, but you can adjust it down pretty easy,
Okay.
which is what I had
Good.
done. And it was the first time that I had ever run anything for my mom or sister, at least. And I don't want to get into spoilers for the adventure, but I'll just say in their particular case, they had befriended a sheep, and they were trying to smuggle this sheep out of town, essentially, and they were being chased by a minion and some wolves. And
Okay.
my mom was a cleric with the flowing robes and had the sheep, hidden underneath her, running around town. They're trying to evade their pursuers. But the one thing they couldn't get around was the scent of the sheep. The wolves had
Right.
it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I thought it was over, man. It was one of those moments where you're like, okay, well, they're going to get captured. They're going to have to deal with it that way. And I'm sure you have moments like this and I know a lot of other DMs have moments like this in their memory bank. You look across the table, and I look in my mom's eyes, and there's just this glimmer. And it was this is her first game, and this was the first time she asked me, "Can I do something?" She literally used the phrase, "Can I do something?" Well, yeah, you can. That's what's great about the game. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
she said, "I want to pee on it," and it it blew my mind, like, because I was like, God, that's so good,
yeah.
to
I love that.
throw off the scent, and it worked, and the thing, um, the adventure continued from there. But um, I remember that look in my mom's eyes, and here you have someone who's maybe a little bit restricted in their movement, day to day in terms of their
Yeah.
what they can do athletically or in terms of mobility, and getting to imagine that they're the hero, and then running around a town, and then on top of that, like this incredibly clever idea that saved the
Yeah.
day. um
Absolutely clutch urine
yeah.
for mom out there. That I mean, and I don't want to interrupt you. I want you to keep rolling, but yes, to your point, I
Yeah.
absolutely know that look, and I think there are so many DMs out there who are driven on to run the next session, introduce the next player, because of that look,
that
because that experience of watching people get it finally and know this is what TTRPGs are. This
yeah.
is what D&D is. So sorry, I didn't
No,
want
no,
to,
no,
I don't
no.
want to derail you, but I completely understand that moment.
Yeah, yeah, and you didn't derail me at all. It's that feeling that everyone understands, and then for me, it was just the additional layer of, um, here's someone who cannot commit to a full campaign. Here's someone,
Right.
and is probably not, maybe not so interested in committing, but definitely doesn't have the bandwidth or the time. And God, after I played that game, I thought about, other people who don't have the time, don't have the bandwidth, maybe have like some sort of physical, mental, any type of limitation that would
Right.
prevent them from doing a full campaign. But look, you can still deliver that joy in this concentrated one-shot device, and that's why I want to make them. That
Okay.
that's
Great.
that's why I got
I
on Twitter. That's why, I'm happy I did. I met people like you, but that's the personal part. And then in terms of selling it, you would of course use that. I guess you could use that type of story. It's sharing joy, but there's additional selling points for sure. I think, like, for a DM like you, like, who I think is pretty much a lifer. Hey, you get to take a break.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah.
My impression is that you're the DM the majority of the time. Obviously, you've got your own show right now, and hey, like, maybe one of your players run this, and you get to take a break and be a player for once.
Yeah,
Which
that's an aspect. Josh and I we touched on briefly in our conversation on split screen. I love that notion, both for the DM being able to take that mantle off for a little bit and just swing a sword and
Yep.
cause problems for someone else.
Yeah.
But also, the other side of it. I mean, there are many players out there who, again, might really be excited about DMing, but don't want to commit to having to DM a whole campaign. And it's tough to find players who go, hey, yeah, sure, I'll let you run 3 sessions for me, and then you might get tired of it and decide it's not for you, and I'll just throw that character in the rubbish bin, and we'll be on to something else. So yeah, it's a great place to catch your breath in, on whatever side of the screen you're sitting on. I love that.
No, yeah, and so, and that's something that hadn't occurred to me, but great. It's a great opportunity for players who want to try DMing. Also, for example, if the permanent DM wants to try a one shot for maybe a change in tone, maybe a change in theme, type of story, that's a perfect opportunity to do that. For the players, maybe you want to experiment with a different class, that you're not sure you would want to commit to. And I think an extra bonus with the players is, if it's a one shot, you you lose some of that meta concern about staying alive, and
Yes.
maybe you're more committed to role playing a character who, rushes in with no regard for danger. Or, um, one of the few times I got to play, one of my favorite characters was a monk bard who behaved like a tank, even though he didn't have the stats to back it up. Was standing in front of the party, get behind me.
Hip, yeah,
even though
I
he
love
was
that.
you
He's
could knock him over with a gust of wind. Um,
yeah,
it's
that's great.
and so whenever you can minimize that sort of meta consideration of I want to keep my character alive, you kind of increase the immersion, which is a lot of fun too, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and I know that's something that in numerous conversations I've had with Josh, because at our table he is definitely kind of the most mechanically oriented, power gamer oriented, and he has mentioned on a number of occasions how what a relief it is in that one shot space to kind of, it was kind of interesting to hear him say he almost talked about it as if he was kind of able to uh, unload this burden of the meta. And again, it's, I mean, he certainly he is the character he is of his own volition. He likes the games for the game for the reasons he does. But I think you hit it on the head for anyone. I mean, I hadn't really considered this, but the more I'm thinking about it now, for anyone, player or DM alike, if you can identify someone who maybe holds a little too tight to what the most optimized thing is to do, what a great way to give them some space to get a taste of what it's like to not worry about that quite so much. I love that as a certainly one of the key selling points for the one shot. That's great.
So yeah, I mean, I think I do think it provides a field for both sides of the screen to really test new things out if they want to do that, including switching sides of the
Yeah.
screen. And beyond that, like in terms of what we led off with, just bringing the game um, to others, um, either as a new thing or as something that can fit in within their schedules or what their situation allows. Like I think they're great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, as you're listing off the pros of the one shot, I mean, I'm sitting here going like, yeah, that's a great point. That's a great, and yet I still don't find myself running them often. And I think that boils down to, like, we've hit here the why. I mean, I think you've made a solid case for why we should consider one shots, and certainly why you consider one shots. If it's cool with you, let's pivot a little bit into the how, because I think that's the barrier that keeps me uh, firmly in my really long form space. Is I know that there are, people who spend a lot of time in this headspace thinking about how to achieve something meaningful in a single session, which, as far as I'm concerned, is an unbelievable task. It really is. I'm really impressed with the people who are out there, knocking one shots out of the park, because it is something that I struggle with. But so with the time that you've spent in that headspace, are there any tips and tricks, best practices, these types of thoughts, or just general considerations that someone who's new to one shots, or maybe even someone who is a pretty seasoned vet on one shots, can take to the table with them the next time they're rolling out a short form adventure?
Yeah, yeah. I love your question because one of the phrases you used was, how do you accomplish something in a single session? And that kind of goes to the substantive storytelling, I think. How do you tell a satisfying story, or at least how do you satisfy the players? Maybe it doesn't have to be so story centric in a single sitting.
Right.
So I think that's a common how question, and then the other, I think, very common how question is how do you get it done in 3 to 4 hours, like just
Yes,
like
please,
more
please tell me.
mechanically.
Tell me.
So I do think the in terms of accomplishing something satisfying, the first one, which is maybe the easier one, um, I, I do think you can tell an effective story in a single sitting. Like try to tell Edgar Allan Poe he can't tell a good short horror story or anything like that.
Right.
I do think there is a very real challenge though when you're talking about epic. You know, I'm watching you on Modern Myth. This is an epic story that you're telling. It's trying to cram that feeling um, into a single sitting is tough. And maybe to use a frame of reference that people who aren't caught up on your show, like Lord of the Rings, you can't get to Mordor in 3 hours. It's not.
I I I really appreciate the correlation that you're drawing between our show and Lord of the Rings. By the way, I that's I'll take that any day. I know that it's not an intentional correlation, but I'm just the fact that they're sitting in the same room with each other. I'll take that.
No, no, absolutely. You are telling an epic story. But I mean, you are, and like I said, like that's a very real challenge. And I think when someone that's a legitimate point that someone can bring up and say, a one shot can't do that for me, and I think that's true. But I think it can be taken too far, because you cannot get the ring to Mordor, but you can save a town. You can do the old-fashioned Western movie where the invaders are coming. You got to get the townsfolk ready. You can get that done in 3 hours, and you can have the
Yeah.
townsfolk, thanking you, trying to give you everything they have, and everybody but the rogue takes something. You can you can do that.
Yeah.
And so for those players who really enjoy sort of the idealistic, um, heroic journey, I, you can do that. Not on the same scale, but that's still there. And then that's something you can accomplish for those type of players. It's interesting, because I know you have a background in older editions, and I also am older than I'd like to admit. Uh, but maybe you bumped into some more players who were more about just getting all the gold they could, or
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. I think there's a certain ethos out there. Actually, I would say to some extent, certainly the impression you would get from, say, actual play culture, which it's kind of hard to get a sense of what other people are doing at their tables
yeah,
without them, publishing it in some capacity. But you would get the sense that this kind of modern ethos of Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop RPG is it. But
mhm,
but in reality, I actually think it's, very possibly in the minority, maybe even in the vast minority. Um, it just happens to be the most broadly consumable via technology. So, I have no data to back that up, but I know plenty of people who, play an old school, or let's say a more old school ethos game that I don't think is adequately represented by, say, what we are doing with Rakish Rovers or what many other actual plays are doing. And I think what they're doing maybe closer to the norm, in fact, in terms of the what what tables, kind of what the mentality is at a given table.
yeah. That's a really good point. I had. I know we're going off a little bit, but that's really interesting
That Yeah,
because
I mean, that's
um,
I like the space because of that, because sometimes we find ourselves moving in the weeds, and that's
diverging.
sometimes the most interesting part. So
But
that's good.
but yeah, I think that those kind of games, which I've played, it's just about the gold. Um, that those are fun games. Now, would they be fun to watch if you have no stake in it? Maybe not, and maybe that's why they haven't flourished, in the AP market as much as kind of the heroic journey stories. But in any event, I would say for one shots, you can appeal. In my view, you can appeal to players who might prefer that type of gameplay as well. And I think you got to be a little more creative, especially with someone who is just a gold hoarder, who's just in there to get the gold pieces. Because what do they get at the end? It's over after the one shot. And what I think one of the best ways to handle that is to create a competitive element. So, for example, if you have a
Interesting.
heist,
Okay.
if you have a heist one shot, put those people up against a competing NPC heist team, or
Okay. I love that.
like, if you've got people who just want to bash monsters, put them in a gladiator coliseum against other opponents, because I think there is a large amount of overlap over, uh, players who are interested in collecting gold, who would also like that kind of competitive gamification.
Right,
Um,
right. Well, and I love. I mean, we haven't. I know I'm putting the cart a little before the horse here because I think we're going to get to this space. But your example of using a competing NPC heist team, I love the clock that you have this phantom timer. All the players do, kind of floating above you, going. If you're not being decisive, sure as hell the NPC heist team is being decisive. And I know certainly from my side of things, time management in real life is not one of my strong skills. In and I think that travels to the table. I think it's part of why the one shot is something I really need to work at and not just sit down and I just fall right into that space. So if this is a good pivot, if like I said, I'm not trying to rush you by any means, but if this is a good pivot to talk a little bit about that time management element, because it literally, that example really was such a tangible means of telling the players, hey, you're on the clock, without literally going, hey, there's a giant clock ticking and you better get this done. And in my experience, which I admittedly is limited, the challenge has always been, how do you make the time that the players have meaningful, and how do you disincentivize poor use of that time? That's something that I've always found as a struggle, even as a DM. Like I can sit at the table, and even though I know like we really got to get this going, I find myself we're having a 15-minute chat with the guy who's trying to sell them sell them a health potion or whatever. It's so it's just one of these things where I'll know in the back of my mind this clock is ticking. I think materializing that for your players is something I'm poor at, and I guess tell me if I'm way off base here, but I think that seems like it would be a really important element for achieving that single session sense of accomplishment.
and you're saying the time management would be a very important element for
Yeah,
achieving that.
both from the DM side of actually managing the session, that's more of like the meta time management, but also the in-game clock that's moving, the game time that's moving, that the players, as best I can tell, they need to feel like time is a valuable resource and minutes going by are wasted. Like they need to make the most of all the time they have. And if the mission is, hey, there's some goblins and they've kind of been messing with us for the last year, and it'd be great if they weren't messing with us anymore. That'd be cool. Go. Like, they go, well, let's have a few drinks before we go mess with some goblins. Like, but if it's, oh, my daughter was just kidnapped and I heard them, they were talking about sacrificing her to some their demonic god, who know, now there's a clock there. They know that if we don't get there soon, the whole reason for going there might be kaput. So, I guess, like I said, I know it's the thing I struggle with probably the most. Can talk with me a little bit about when you're writing one shots and when you're running one shots, and what considerations you're having with regard to, I guess maybe the question should be, when you're writing one shots, are there elements you're putting in that natively instantiate that time constraint for the players? Or is that something that that is left to the DM to say, hey, DM, you're trying to do this in a session, you better get them going.
100%. In terms of, yes, that is something that I'm trying to inject into everything that I write, and finding that thing for me is the most important part. You know, you need a way, and this is my view. You need a way to start Act 3. You can presume a 3-act structure if you're comfortable with that, whatever you want to call
Yeah.
it, to start
Yeah,
the
that's
ending.
great.
But I'll just say Act 3. You need a way to start Act 3 at the drop of a hat, while at the same time respecting that the players have a role in shaping the story.
Okay.
So
I like that. Yeah.
if if you can't start Act Three, say when it's at 2.5 hours, you're not going to finish. By
Right.
the same token, if you force Act Three without acknowledging in a way that doesn't acknowledge all the actions that the players took up to then, you take away their agency. You make them feel like their choices don't matter. It's the worst kind of railroading. I don't know that all railroading is bad, but that kind of railroading where what they do doesn't matter is bad in my
Yes,
view.
absolutely. Yeah.
At least for a lot of players, then you've got a problem. So finding that balance um, is my main objective in writing these one shots. And for me, I call it the Act Three button. Any adventure that you get from me is going to have the Act Three button, which is a significant event that the DM can make happen, that is still respectful of everything that's happened up to that point, and even without knowing, before you start, obviously, what it is the players have done. and
Right, right,
and
right.
and this is different than I think this is a shade different, or at least on a spectrum, on the other end of a spectrum, than some of the ticking clock devices that you may have alluded to, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
say the players are transporting a magical weapon, and they're trying to get
Okay.
it from point A to point B, before it loses all its magic. So you can press them narratively, uh, obviously by saying, oh, as you sit there and have your third beer, the green glow of the dagger, fades, another degree, and and
Yeah,
and, and so
yeah.
and that type of narrative push, um, I think is common, and you've something that you and other dungeon masters probably use in one form or another in a regular campaign. and
Absolutely,
and,
yeah.
and that's and I think a lot of that, like a lot of the advice for anything, including time management, that people look to in terms of running a campaign, applies to one shots. But I think the extra thing, um, that's needed, at least for me. There's experienced DMs who can probably do this organically, I'm sure. But for me, and what I want to provide people, is this button you push at the 2 hour mark if you're trying to get done in three, where this is going to get things rolling towards the end.
Right,
And,
right.
and we had, I think, we had talked a while back. Probably the easiest version of it is a natural disaster, like an
Okay,
earthquake.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was
Yeah.
actually just about to ask if you had an example for myself or anyone at home listening. So keep rolling with that. Yeah,
No, no,
thank you.
yeah. So I think, I think like a natural disaster is kind of an easy one. And if I were creating an adventure that had some type of weather incident like that, rather than just pull it out, out of nowhere, maybe something in the adventure would acknowledge and look to preparing or somehow dealing with that natural disaster. So it's not
Absolutely,
like you just drop
absolutely.
it on the players and it's like, here's the end of the story. It's like something that they look to. Then everything they do for the first 2 to 3 hours in terms of preparing for the earthquake, preparing for the tornado, preparing for the windstorm, whatever it is, um, can have an effect. If they sat around and just drank beer, um, for the 2 hours, and then the earthquake comes, and the whole town is eaten up by the earthquake,
There's going to be a
collapses.
lot of
Yeah,
destroyed towns
yeah,
throughout the course
there.
of tabletop RPGs. I think there's going to be a lot of demolished towns out there. But
Sometimes
no,
you hear
I
me, you
love
hear
I
right,
love
right,
that.
yeah. There's
Yeah,
sometimes
I
where,
love that ripcord
yeah,
concept, and doubly so putting the players in a position where they can begin to take actions to prepare and mitigate some of the threat of that big event. I love
yeah,
that.
and
That's
yeah, like or the alternative to drinking beer, which sometimes respecting their decisions is it's painful, but the alternative is, they've been boarding up windows, they've been doing, I don't know how quite you would prepare for an earthquake, but say a hurricane, and the town is ready. And it doesn't have to. You can still throw a twist in, like out of the earthquake, a monster arises, and that's
right, right.
that's not something that they were necessarily prepared for. But the fact that they've evacuated the town and braced all these structures helps against the monster too. Um, and
Right.
and and actually articulating that, as you DM, which is a skill I've seen DMs have, and again, in any context where it's like, you know, the the house is hold against the windstorm with all the boards and supports that you erected, and what I'm reaffirming
Right, right.
what they did.
Really making those actions meaningful, and tying the impact of those actions to the outcome of that event. And actually, as you're saying that with the natural disaster ripcord, it actually, I think, parallels really well with, I think, an earlier example you gave, which is the kind of your classic rallying the town for a siege defense.
Yeah.
That I mean, that siege is coming, and I guess I had never really thought about it in those terms of, like, as a DM, the beauty of a siege is that siege shows up whenever the hell you choose it does. And if that's what it's going to take to push this into the third act and get us going, I love that. And obviously there's tons of opportunity for the players' actions leading up to a siege to have implications on the outcome of that battle. So like I said, I mean, again, this is speaking to just how out of touch I am with the one shot headspace. But I love the immediacy of kind of how from in a narrative arc standpoint, that ripcord, that lever, really does take you from, you're kind of in this rising action stage as the players are doing their things, to bam, we have just hit, we're moving into third act. We are hitting that climax space and preparing to resolve that and move into the resolution. And that's great. Like I said, I will be throwing that one in my pocket for the next time. I mean, and like I said, the beauty is that, I mean, there's all sorts of application in a bigger campaign for a similar thought process. Again, I think I've grown so accustomed to, again, it's such a different scope of timeline that some of these just basic, I mean, that, as you say that, it seems so obvious. But I really, really like that tool in your tool bag for moving into, we're wrapping up in 3 to 4 hour kind of time frame. I love that.
No, that's great, and I hope it's something that you can use. And I don't remember exactly when it occurred to me that it was something that I need, but I mean, you can watch plenty of one shots with amazing dungeon masters, online, and amazing players, which is part of the problem because players are so creative, and
Yeah.
just in terms of their interactions, and everyone is having so much fun. And the sort of passive, oh, you guys need to make a decision, whether that's said in a meta way or a narrative way, it isn't enough, and so I've seen one shots run by DMs that I could never hope to match, but where they still had problems because they were still, if you broke it down into acts, they were still in act one at the 2.5 hour mark, and literally had to like fast forward and just say, okay, now you're there, and now you're here,
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I totally get it, and so that's what the third act button, that's what I want it to do. I want to pick your brain. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, and this will be really quick. I know if I was setting out to, admittedly, I'll say this much. For better or for worse, have a poor relationship with pre-published content. I ran modules as I got into Dungeons and Dragons, and I pretty much, as soon as I felt comfortable stepping away from them, that's precisely what I did, and I've kind of never looked back. I've read numerous modules since, because I think there's plenty of good things to, good practices, great ideas for various types of encounters. But actually running off them, the one shot is maybe the exception to that for me. Maybe not. It may be another deal where I just need to get I will need published content until I get to a place where I go, I really feel comfortable being able to execute in a single session. But I love the idea that someone is out there designing these stories with that lever in mind, because that's precisely a feature that I would want if I'm going to go out. If I'm going to write it myself, then it is what it is. But if I go out and jump online and purchase a one shot and then go, well, there are none of the tools in here to help me make this happen in one session. It's just expected that I do that myself. Well, I could have done that with something I wrote myself. So I love the fact that you're making a conscious effort to include the mechanical and narrative structuring into that design that basically bring things to a head, so that it can be, let's say, reliably achievable in a single session. And so just a nod to future publications. I know I'm just one person, but that is absolutely a feature in a one-shot publication that I would regard highly. I would consider that to be a high value feature, knowing that if I'm going to one shot and I'm getting something, I know that he's kind of got my back on the time management thing. I can just focus on running the game, and I know I'm going to have that moment where when I need to get the players going into Act 3, he's got me covered. So I value that highly. I don't know if I'm in the minority or not, but that's a knowing that you're out there thinking about that. That's great.
No, well, thank you so much for saying that. And I getting to that point, figuring out what the button is for me the most exciting part. And that's the part as a creator, once I get that, once I know what that's going to be, then everything sort of falls in line. It's so before I get to that point, it's always, I don't have no idea if this is going to work. Once I find it, then the story kind of builds off that, and it may evolve a little bit, but really that would be the that's the one thing that I definitely would be universal in anything I put out, at least initially. And that's kind of where, like your box text, the that's where I might actually have, like, 4 or 5 sentences, and leave it to DMs who would rather improvise. Then that's exactly what they should do. But really describe that hurricane hitting the town, and really, and that now they know, word it in a way that is dramatic, and lets the players know, through the storytelling, that this is it. So yeah, I'm excited about it too. I wanted to back up though, just
Yeah, absolutely.
and you've been talking about how it's kind of a maybe a difficult space for you, or an uncomfortable space for you. And I just think it's so, I see it so much. It's another area where DMs put it all on themselves, and that they just shouldn't. In my view, like,
I would love to hear how it's my player's fault.
it's your
Go ahead,
player's fault.
hit me.
No, but without ascribing blame, just in terms of, I think it's a shared effort. I mean, first of all, ask yourself, do you care? If I know you have such a tight group, obviously, and they could be there next week. Do you really need to finish it in this sitting? And maybe that's a problem with the motivation to even try it. It's like, why bother?
Yeah, well, and the thing is I've been in that exact spot where I've gone, well, whatever. We don't need to finish tonight. That's fine. I've been there, and I mean, even running long form, there's times where I'll kind of have an idea of where I think we might round out a session, and then how players do. They take the path to the left, and they're like, all they could talk about last session was going down the path on the right, and so. But it's a deal where I have a very agnostic attitude about getting to a specific place. That's changed a little bit since we've gone into production, because I do, I want to try to end an episode in a compelling place it's not an easy thing to do, but to think about not just us sitting at the table, which we've done the entire time we've been running the campaign for 3 years, but now there's potentially people who are consuming that. And I can't just go like, okay, and he raises the sword and right there's where we're going to go ahead and cut. And, we'll pick that up from, I mean, there's a little more impetus to find a good place to stop. But I definitely can agree with the notion that when you are so used to having your regularly scheduled play group, the demand to achieve the one shot loses a lot of value. And I think, maybe to your point, there's people I'd love to sit down and play with, who really, they would demand of me that I get it done, or we would demand of each other, to your point, that we get this done in one go. And maybe that's part of, not maybe, I'm sure that's part of my ongoing grappling
Yeah.
match with one
Yeah.
shots in general.
So
So,
that, and
but
that's,
continue,
yeah,
please.
no, that's exactly. So that's like the first question. Are you really trying to get it done? Is it something you really care about? And I think that's a great hypo would be, what if Modern Myth wants to do a one shot and put it up on YouTube? Okay, now it, if you're going to call it, especially you call it a one shot, it should be over in 3 to 4, right? And
Right,
so you
right.
do that, and then um, you being so, obviously so tight with your group, this maybe not as big of a factor, but I would say, just to say for anyone else watching, after you come to that place yourself as a DM, then you got to talk to your players. Um, and two things. First, in the vein of not putting it all on yourself, like, say, hey, this is a different type of game. You're not really going to have time to um, sit and drink beer for 15
Max
15 minutes at their
three
tavern,
drinks,
three
three
drinks at the
drinks
tavern.
max.
You can,
Then we gotta actually adventure. Let's go.
so I mean, and you know your own players. Kind of what the limits would be. I run my campaign. It's all lawyers, so
Okay.
and I love it, and I think they love it, at least at times. But I mean, you talk about like trying to make a decision. It's constantly paralysis by analysis with the smallest thing,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and we enjoy that. But I was if I was in a situation with them where I'm like, we got to get this done, or if I was in a different context, I would say that this is not going to be that kind of game.
Right,
And
right.
it's so you can make sure that they're on board with that, um, so they're not shocked when you're cutting them off with outside events, when they don't have the same amount of time to make decisions. I think too many DMs just put it on themselves, like, I got to figure out a way narratively to push this faster than I normally would. Fine, do that, but also have the conversation about the game.
Right,
and,
right, right.
and
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I love that you nailed that, because I mean, I don't know how many episodes of Split Screen, DM and the PM, a cornerstone of everything we talk about boils down to communication, whether it's DM player communication or in game, out of game. And I love that I mean, communication, we really think of as kind of I mean, it is the oil that runs any good gaming table, is solid communication. And that's a perfect example, and not one that I've necessarily acknowledged myself, of if you are doing a good job of communicating as a DM, and your players are reciprocating about what this experience is going to be, you are now a unified table in getting this done, not players who are trying to have their fifth pint while you're trying to get them to go save the princess or whatever it is that they're actually supposed to be doing in this 4-hour time span. I love that. And like I said, it's a perfect illustration of how potent communication is in the game space.
Well, 100%. And I think too, um, um, also important, maybe when dealing with players that you don't necessarily know as well, um, kind of a real prevalent feature with the one shots, even if they're lighthearted in a way, is the not a lot of time to make decisions. You're under time pressure, and that that might not be a feeling that somebody wants. You know what I mean? So there may be people
Absolutely,
who don't
absolutely.
react well to or wouldn't prefer, I should say, is a better way to put it, that type of game. So you got to make sure, I think, that people are on board up front. Like, this is going to be a little more, time intensive, pressure wise
Right,
at
right.
least, and make sure everybody knows that going in. So yeah, that just, I'm sorry, I backed up, but I've just heard you.
No, no,
Yeah.
I loved. I mean, as a tangent, I mean, I think you hit on some really, really important points, and I think, yeah, for any DM out there listening, I'm including myself in this group. Is offload some of that responsibility to your players. If you guys are working in unison to get it done in 3 to 4, you're far more likely to do that than if you as a DM are sitting down going like, all right, this next 4 hours is going to be amazing, and your players are going like, 6 weeks from now this is going to be sweet. Where your objectives are misaligned. So one real quick, I've got a tangent of my
Yeah.
own. You're all lawyers game. What classes? I just need to know what classes these lawyers are piloting.
So I've got a rogue, a barbarian, a wizard, a wild, God, a wild magic sorcerer, um, who
Okay.
a little bit of homebrew. So we get significantly more rolls on the wild magic table than you otherwise would. Um,
Okay. So a very wild magic
yes,
sorcerer.
a very that's right. Rogue, barbarian, wizard, wild magic sorcerer, and an oath of vengeance paladin. Uh,
Okay.
Gosh, man, it's fun. But yeah, if you can imagine,
Yeah.
uh, just all the lawyering that goes into decision making, and then with the spells, the wild magic, I can't memorize everything on that table. So,
Oh yeah, yeah.
trying to, as we all sift through and try to adjudicate, how this spell worked on top of that spell, uh, it's a riot, for some, for
Yeah.
us.
Oh,
I don't think
I can only
we could
imagine.
do an actual play.
I wasn't going to be able to go to sleep at night if I didn't have a solid picture in my head of what the party of lawyers were piloting through the Lost Mines of Fendelver. So that is your Fendelver game?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Well, so we're kind of rounding out to, let's say, the kind of the last quarter or so of our conversation. I really want to, you're the man with the plan as far as I'm concerned. So do you feel like at this point there's anything that we haven't really touched on, anything that you're like, this needs to be said? We haven't said it and it needs to be said about one shots. Is there anything we've missed? Any additional tips and tricks? Anything, if you were just looking out into, the all 8 DMs who might be listening right now, if you're talking to them, what more needs to be said that hasn't about one shots, as we're kind of rounding this thing out?
Sure. I think, maybe going back to one thing that we talked about, that you can't get that, um, necessarily, you can't get the complete epic feel. And we talked about how you can still save a town. Another thing, um, another way to address that fact that you can't get that epic feel, uh, is you can get the players, um, a little bit attached to their characters. And I think, in your show about one shots, I think you and Josh had a conversation, and you were talking about how, if you were going to do a one shot, there's not going to be this kind of 30-minute thing at the beginning where everyone goes around and introduces themselves and talks to each other. Um,
Right, right. I think I would, for me, because I already know I'm going to struggle in that department.
yeah,
I would probably be starting in the classic. You guys have known each other for a while. Maybe you've even pulled a few adventures together. Space, which is as antithetical to my long form stuff.
yeah.
It's one of my favorite parts of long form are those first few sessions when people are really only just getting to know each other. But yes, I definitely recall that portion of our
Yeah,
conversation.
so that, I would say, I do think there's a way to mitigate the pain of having to kind of skip over that development a little bit. First, I would say that, I'm I'm pretty much in your camp. I think I just like hot starts. Like, I
Okay.
think I think I like dumping them into the action, especially for a one shot, and then Act One kind of ends, and then they get their objective. Then they find out what their objective is. I have
Oh, okay. I
I
like that.
so I think me and you might be kind of in the same camp on that. I have seen DMs who can do the kind of introduce yourselves like at a dinner. It starts with a dinner party or something. I've seen it done effectively, so it can be done. But if that's if you're worried about time and want to do a hot start, um, I tweeted about this a little while back. One thing you can do is start like a text chain. And
Oh, okay.
for me, I tend to lean towards the more lighthearted um, with this type of stuff. But everybody, if everyone knows who their character is going to be for the one shot, and whether it's pre-gens or not, they made it or you made it. You send out a text like, what would your character do if they ordered a burger with no tomato and there was a tomato on it? What would your character do to the person who didn't return their shopping cart to the Carol? I've actually, you see some of these things show up on Twitter all the time.
I
And
I love that. If there's not a publication with just a laundry
yeah,
list of those questions,
yeah.
there needs to be one.
Yeah, what
100%.
would what would you do if there was a fly on the loose in your apartment and you just couldn't kill it? What would your character do? And
Yeah.
those are more obvious lighthearted. You could definitely go more serious, but you can get engagement with that. And I think in responding to that, naturally people become more attached to their character. When they think
Yeah.
of
Well,
their paladin trying to kill a fly in his apartment, like the attachment grows. And the other advantage is, well, two other advantages. One, they start talking to each other. That could say, well, if my cleric saw your rogue do that, blah blah blah, then you start to
right,
get some of
right.
that interplay.
It would be the rogue who doesn't return
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cart.
yeah.
I mean, everybody knows it would be the rogue who doesn't return the
I
cart.
mean, the groceries are stolen to
Paladin ain't
begin
gonna
with.
stand for that.
um, uh, you can get that kind of engagement. And the other thing that it helps, with this, you're dealing with less bandwidth, less availability sometimes when you're talking about a one shot. People don't have to be texting at the same time. It's not a session zero where everybody's there. Someone responds today,
Right,
someone
right,
responds tomorrow, but you start to get that track record. And
right.
if you're playing, especially if you're playing with a group of friends, people are going to read it. So
Oh yeah,
then when they sit down at the table, there's a little bit more attachment um, to the character. So
yeah,
for what
yeah.
that's worth.
Well, no, I love that as a technique. I mean, one shots aside, I love that as a technique of getting. I mean, as you're saying all of that, I'm immediately thinking about it's a great method for speaking with players who are brand new to the game, who haven't gone through the exercise of putting themselves in a character's shoes before. I mean, really easy for me to, shoot a text off to my friends who this is the first time they're ever going to sit down at the table. Maybe we went through and did some character creation together, but now I can start letting them flesh out their own character's personality and quirks and things like that, and little questions like that. I mean, I think any opportunity you have as a DM to ask your players, don't don't answer this question as Joe, answer this question as Salvatore the Great or whatever your character's name's going to be, just pays unbelievable dividends at the table. And in a one shot space, as far as I'm concerned, I need every dividend I can collect on. So I love that idea about away from the table, what you can achieve, not in the DM chair and not all of them in the players chairs. That this is something you could be doing weeks in advance, months in advance, depending on how far you're out from actually running the game, and really giving people much more time to get to know their characters than they're going to have in that 3 to 4 hours. I love that. I think that's really, really potent advice. I'm definitely gonna. I will be leaning on that and needing to compile a list of questions for future new players. I love bringing new players to the game and sitting down for their first session with them. But that's such a great way to start getting them thinking in their character's headspace. It's a great exercise. Rounding things out, I mean, I think we're getting pretty close to the end here. Like I said, if there is, I usually try to box out kind of the end of these conversations So if there's anything that it doesn't have to be one shot related at all. If there's just something that you've been hyped on lately, maybe you've been, like I said, the examples I think I always go to is like, maybe you've been geeking out on traps. Maybe you've been geeking out on puzzles. Maybe you just thought up a brand new, uh, crazy player character race that you're tweaking around, whatever it is. But I just like to leave a little time at the end here for whoever I'm talking to just kind of hit me with whatever it is they've been crunching on, whatever it is that's been really lighting their fire. You got anything on your plate that the world should know about?
No, nothing in particular so much. I know, and I think from our conversations, one of the ideas I'm working on, one of the one shots is You Gotta Go, where it
Yes,
is going to
yes,
be. I have settled on it. I think being in a Ravenloft setting,
nice.
with the Dark
Eh,
Lord, the mists drag you in, and you're dropped into this setting, and the first problem is you have to go to the bathroom very bad. Um, so and recently I figured out what the Act 3 button was on that,
Oh, very
which
cool, very
is
cool.
a good development. And so 3 or 4 of those where I kind of know what the button is, and then, as I'm sure you're familiar with, another notebook that's just random ideas that it's resting comfortably kind of off to the
Yeah.
side of the desk.
Do
Um,
you feel? Do you feel? I guess comfortable talking in the space here, real quick. In terms of the long game, I mean, is this something that at some point you would envision publishing these as individuals, or thinking about putting together a book of one shots? Oftentimes, I feel like when I've seen one shot material, it's a singularly published one shot. I'm literally, as I'm saying this now, I was thinking like, that's pretty cool. I think I'd drop a little chunk of change to have a nice one-shot anthology, something that I can just flip open to a certain page and go like, better get ready, guys, because you got to go. And you're in at a fancy banquet with the Dark Lord, and there's not a bathroom in sight. And like I really like, the more I'm thinking about it now, actually, I really like the that kind of anthology feel of having a number of publications. But have you given any thought out to when these one shots are going to start reaching the general public? Do you have an idea of in what format? Uh, if you were daydreaming out loud with me right now, how would that look getting into people's hands?
well, if I've got full license to daydream, I would say, what I'd like to do at least a few, just to put it out there, kind of for general use. And obviously with DM's Guild, like something like Ravenloft, I can't just do on my own. I need to go
Right,
through
right.
DM's Guild, and maybe if at some point the work accumulates to the point that it warrants an anthology, that would be awesome. I tell you another thing that I would like. Um, you know, I, I have to say, you're one of the first people I bumped into kind of in the social media space. I think you mentioned that near the top. And
Yeah.
at the time, I was a little bit on the fence with some of this, a little bit intimidated by social media, to be sure. And you said some things, some really, really kind things that I'm thankful for, man. I was at kind of a point where I was questioning whether this was something I wanted to pursue, and there's a lot of other creators like this in this circle,
Right,
in the
right.
Twitter sphere, and I would just love, at some point, I get more familiar, like with your world, for example, and then write you something, and see if you like it. And the thing with one shots, like, and maybe this is one thing that we didn't talk about in terms of working it into an existing campaign. Like, one of the things, one of the tricks that I would offer people who don't want to stray too far from their campaign or their canon is, like, you can totally Rogue One this stuff. Okay, how
Yes,
did they
I
get
love
the
that.
plans?
Yeah.
How did they get this map? Or maybe if your players in your campaign are seeking out this magical item that is in this far off place. Well, maybe it was, before it got to that far off place, it was in an even more irretrievable spot. and there was some
Right,
group of
right,
adventurers who got it out of the bowels of the volcano or whatever, and at least got it to the point where your players
right.
have access to it, and you can tell the story of that party, and they don't have to die. They can live on, and then when you go back to your normal campaign, they are now NPCs under control of the DM if the party happens to run into them or their ancestors or something to that
Right,
effect.
right, right. No,
So, oh,
I really love that. It's something that not necessarily for one shot. It's the most recent one shot that we did, and actually, literally in the last, I want to say in the last 2 years at least, everything that I have run is taking place in the same campaign setting, partially for my own sanity, but also because I love the notion of these smaller events just by scope of your time, a one shot, or I'm running where we have maybe one, I think we're probably one at most 2 sessions left for my a shorter campaign that we did. It's probably only a sub 10 sessions. I want to say it's maybe a nine session campaign when it's all said and done here. That's taking place in the frozen north, and the outcome of that campaign is going to have very real ripples into the Rovers campaign. The Twitter campaign that I'm running right now with Terry from Nerd Night News, or actually everyone from Nerd Night News now, and a number of the really, that's been a very, very enjoyable. I never thought I would be saying the words. Running that Twitter campaign has been very enjoyable. That is to a greater or lesser extent will ultimately be tied in and will have implications on the Rovers campaign. And I love, I think if I was going to seriously employ one shots on a regular basis, it would be as an opportunity to explore little bits of lore that may not even be meaningful when the one shot's running, but when the Rovers encounter, I mean, obviously the one shot itself needs to be meaningful, but they might be going like, cool, we got this thing, we did it, and they won't come to realize how important their actions were until the entire realm is at stake, and they moved that thing out of the volcano, and now it's more accessible for, the baton is being passed. That's one of my favorite looks. And like I said, I've thought more and more about one shots, both through my conversations with Josh and knowing that we were having this conversation. And I really think that's the direction that I look to employ them. And I know that, the thought that I've been putting into it, and certainly sitting down and having this conversation with you, is going to leave me far better armed for those future endeavors. So again, I really appreciate you sitting down, and to your earlier point, I think I have been very, very fortunate. I think there's a group of people on the social media space who've been fortunate that we all cross paths. There's an awesome supportive community there. I'm elated that we've both found each other in that circle. So no, beyond that, man, I mean, you got any parting words for those people at home? Your last chance to tell them, to get them to just throw out 2.5 years worth of campaign work and start working on that one shot here.
you don't have to throw it out. That's the last thing I would say. You're just taking a
It's
quick break to try something new. That's all.
There you go. And variety is the spice of life. So I think that's a pretty strong sale. You probably already know, because I know that you have seen a bit of our content, but you probably already know that we have a little bit of a tradition here at Modern Myth. We sign off all of our videos with the phrase, "The world is yours." And I really try to allow anyone who is guesting to do the honors, and I really try to allow them to do it in whatever way they think is their way of doing it. So I'm going to take us out here, but I'm going to hand it over to you to finish us off, if that works for you.
That's great. That's great. I get to talk to the people.
Okay, right on. Well, on that note, I'm just going to say thank you guys so much for joining us this time. I hope you got as much out of this conversation about one shots as I did. Joe/Oneshotmill. If you need to get with him, you will find all the links in the description. You can also easily find him on Twitter at OneShotMill, correct?
Yep. The one time.
So At One Shot Mill.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so, with all of that, thank you guys so much for joining us this time. Until next time.
Create with kindness, sticking with our theme, manage your time well, because for these few precious moments that we're here, the world is yours.